Welcome and thank you everyone for joining today. We're going to walk you through Take a Day Off with Oracle Absence Management. Just a quick reminder for everyone, all attendees have been placed on mute for the duration of this presentation. If you have any questions, please submit them through the question portal and we will take time at the end of the presentation to answer them. We also have a series of polls today that require your participation. Answering these polls allows us to better cater our webinars to what you guys want to see, and also a copy of the presentation will be sent out in the next few days following the webinar. Any of our past Elire webinars, as well as the recording of today's webinar, can be found on the Elire Inc. YouTube channel and elire.com. So I just want to walk you through a quick little agenda slide and also introduce ourselves. Before we actually get into that, this is just a high-level overview of what we're going to be walking you guys through today. And before we get into the bulk of the presentation, just wanted to showcase this, and then we can actually get rolling. So, just some quick introductions. My name is Alex Hintz, and I am the Business Development Manager on the Business Development team here at Elire. And I'm going to be walking you guys through this webinar today. And the consultant, the certified specialist on the call that's actually going to be doing the bulk of it is Adam Cantwell, and I will pass it over to Adam and let him do a quick intro.
Thanks, Alex. Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Cantwell. I am a consultant with Elire specializing in Oracle Absence Management, Core HR, OTBI reporting, and data conversion.
So for all of you, this is just a quick little snapshot of Elire. We were established and founded in 2005, so we've been in business for a little over 13 years. And we help our clients succeed by partnering to efficiently implement, integrate, and upgrade their software investments. We provide strategic guidance to assist with best practice process improvement and really help our clients unlock potential of their software investments. And a deep commitment to excellence and quality is really one of our core values. And we pride ourselves on being a trusted advisor. Some of our relevant practice areas at Elire, we have anything from ERP and HCM on the cloud side to PeopleSoft, Treasury, advanced technologies, strategic advisory. And we have, over 200 clients that we have worked with in the past, over 40 plus that are on the Fortune 500 side, and 30 plus financial services. And again, something that is a differential from Elire is just the fact that we like to pride ourselves on being a trusted advisor, and hopefully we can show you some things that are beneficial to everyone on this webinar today. This is a quick snapshot of some of our clients, and you see this from every single partner out there. But I think one of the differences, and again, going back to that trusted advisor, is the fact that these are real relationships. We've worked with these clients, we know them on a personal level, and it's just a brief snapshot of some of the logos that we have. So there is a quick poll question, and that is number one, and we will let everyone take a quick minute to answer that. So I'll read it for everyone. What does your organization currently use to manage absences? Please select one of the following: Absence Management Cloud, Oracle Cloud HCM, another cloud system, on-premise system, whether that's EBS, PeopleSoft, or another, or vendor handles this module. And again, give you a quick minute to answer that. All right. So we are closing this poll, and it looks like we have well, everyone vendor handles this module. Okay. So now I'm going to pass it off to Adam Cantwell, and he will be walking you through the duration of this webinar. So Adam, take it away.
Thank you very much, Alex. I appreciate it. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Hope you're all doing well today. Today, we're going to go through we're going to do some high-level overview of absence management, as well as a deep dive into some certain areas of it. I'm going to try to move through that portion a little quickly so that I can get to the case study. If there's anything that you hear me gloss over or possibly leave out or not talk about on the screen that you would like to hear about or discuss, please feel free to throw that into the questions section, and we will try to address that towards the end of the presentation. So just as a quick overview, Oracle Absence Management is a part of a group of modules known as Workforce Management, and that comprises of absence and time and labor. Oracle Absence Management is available if you already have global HR, then that module is available for you to leverage. The main point to Oracle Absence Management is kind of exactly what it sounds. It's monitoring and maintaining paid time off balances, sick leaves, jury duty, medical leaves, FMLA, anything required by local municipalities as well. It's a way to monitor and track those, and then also if you're utilizing either an external vendor or Oracle Payroll, that you can utilize Oracle Payroll to pay those out. And then it also integrates with Oracle Time and Labor. So whichever way you would like to leverage the system, you are fairly flexible in your options between Oracle Absence Management and Time and Labor as well. So I'm going to talk about just some high-level Oracle Absence Management terminology. Absence reasons. This is an optional attribute that you can configure within Absence Management. You can see the example here. Let's say you have an absence that is a sick leave, and you want to know exactly what that absence was for, whether you need a doctor's note or something of that nature, if it's flu, if it's an injury or something like that. Again, these are completely optional to set up. They're really just for reporting purposes, if your company wanted to, for any reason, leverage those. A very large part of absence management is the approvals process. And so if you are familiar at all with the Oracle Cloud absence or approval management through the BPM work list, it's the same concept in Core HR translates over to absence management as well. These are configurable workflows that you can set up with very robust criteria to route approvals where they need to go. Most companies for a regular PTO plan are just going to do up to the employee's manager or something of that nature, but you can get fairly intricate with these as well if you do so choose. A large chunk of what I'm going to talk about today is an absence plans in Oracle, and what absence plans are in Oracle Cloud. That's where the employee's entitlement and their accruals are going to be housed. So if I have, I get 80 hours of vacation a year, that calculation is going to be set up within the absence plan. In addition to that, the absence plan is also where you will tie absence management into the payroll module. And we'll talk about that later on in the presentation. Again, this is just kind of a high-level overview. I would say the other big chunk, the other half of Oracle Absence Management are the absence types. Big keyword to remember is that type equals take. The absence type is what your employees are going to see on the screen when they apply for absences. You can use them to group absences as far as or for reporting purposes. They also allow you to customize display features for each absence, and we'll talk about that more in depth once we get to it. but there are some pretty robust display features that you can configure for employees to view when they're entering an absence if you're trying to capture certain data. And then the final piece of absence management we're going to talk about is the eligibility profiles. And these eligibility profiles can be configured to assign absence plans and absence types to employees so that they're allocated according to your company policy. So, absence plans. I'm going to talk about the 3 basic types of absence plans today. Know that there are more, especially with the releases that Oracle's coming out with, but these are kind of your bread and butter, the 3 standard absence plans that most companies are going to leverage. So the first one is called an accrual plan. An accrual plan is your basic paid time off, vacation, sick time, floating holiday. It could either be front loaded, as in I get 80 hours at the beginning of the year and then I don't get anything until next year, or they could be incremental. If I make 10 hours of absence for every pay period, that's configurable within that plan. And we'll talk about that a little more in depth as well in just a few minutes here. Qualification plan is a plan in which an employee is entitled to a certain amount of hours for an absence, or days, weeks, whatever your company policy may be. And the reason it's called a qualification plan is because the system views it as there's a qualifying event or there's some sort of scenario that requires you to take this type of leave. So maternity leave is a perfect example, the qualifying event being the birth, or short-term disability. If you've had an accident or an injury while on the job, that would be a qualifying event in which you would qualify for short-term disability, long-term disability, whatever the requirement may be for you to go on leave. And then finally, a no entitlement plan is the last plan that we're going to talk about. And we're going to talk about this one briefly, but a no entitlement plan is ultimately a plan that has no balance or no entitlement tied to it. So what I mean by that is something like jury duty or military leave or bereavement. If you don't have a company policy that limits those things, you can use a no entitlement plan because they don't really track a balance. You don't have a set amount of hours every year that you can use for that. And you can either pay that out at 100%, or you can just use it to track other time if you, for any particular reason, needed to track unpaid time and you don't have a limit on your balance or anything like that. So we'll talk about all of these more in depth as well in just a moment. So this is a configuration screenshot just from the accrual plans. And for the most part, all of this is pretty standard, kind of self-explanatory. But the couple things that I really wanted to touch on for Oracle Absence Management is your plan term. So down at the bottom here, you can see I've got the calendar year highlighted. The plan term determines when your accrual is going to happen, or when your yearly accrual is going to happen, when your carryover is going to happen, and it's the year-end process. When does that happen? When do you calculate the rollover from last year? So for most companies, if you have a set date in mind, then that's configurable here. On 1/1 of every year, my plan rolls over, and if I get 80 hours a year with a carryover of 40 hours, the calculation is happening on 1/1 of that next year. Additionally, in the absence plan term, we also have anniversary date. So if you have a policy where your employees can accrue 10 hours a month for all year, and you start accruing that on your service anniversary, So whatever your hire date is, you can use that for the plan term as well. The other highlighted area over here is the Enable Current Entitlement box. And so the big thing to take away from this configuration for that Enable Concurrent Entitlement, what that means is if that is enabled for 2 plans at the same time, you can deduct hours from both plans concurrently. So something like short-term disability and FMLA, for example, is a perfect example, because if I go on 3 weeks of short-term disability, that also should be counting against my FMLA balance for 3 weeks as well. So instead of having to enter in 3 weeks of STD and then 3 weeks of FMLA, if I enable this concurrent entitlement and then configure an absence type, which we'll talk about that once we get to the absence types, it just simplifies things, so you don't have to be double entering or double tracking your absence plans. You can really just be taking one leave and one entitlement from the employee's perspective, but on the admin perspective, you can see that you're tracking both plans at the same time. So it's really flexible and is definitely a huge plus and mitigates a lot of extra work that HR administration might have to undergo. So some other features within Oracle Absence Management, for enrollment rules, if you have a waiting period, up here on the upper left-hand side, let's say you have an absence plan and no one is allowed to actually take absences until you're 90 days into the job. So that you can specify certain waiting periods depending on your company policy, whether you have to wait a certain amount of days, weeks, months, anything like that, that is configurable within the enrollment rules. And then over on the right-hand side, you can see the termination rules down here. And so these are pretty common for an absence management system. If you're terminating an employee, if they've resigned or something of that nature, and you need to pay them out for the absences that they've already accrued, that's configurable here with just these little check buttons. And so additionally, if you wanted to recover any negative balance, possibly if your company policy allows your employees to take negative absences, and you want to recoup that balance at the end of their employment, you can do that as well, and that's configurable here. Again, the same thing applies for loss of plan eligibility. So if I have an employee that is maybe a full-time employee and goes down to a part-time basis, and company policy is that you have to pay them out for the absences they've earned, they're not going to be enrolled in this plan anymore, then you can configure that down there as well. And then finally, down at the bottom, the eligibility profiles. The eligibility profiles, like I said before, are criteria-based profiles that an employee has to match in order to gain that plan. So we'll go through one of those real quick towards the end. And you'll see those are pretty self-explanatory as far as how the criteria works. And then the only thing you really have to know is that you tie that to the accrual plan and the type at the same time. So the nitty-gritty of accruals happens on the accruals tab of the plan. And so we've got a couple different features to highlight here. Number one are partial period formulas. So a partial period formula, Oracle Absence Management uses what they call fast formulas. They're custom formulas that you write. It's kind of like a scripting language. And through these formulas, and we'll get into it in the case study a little bit more, you can specify certain rules and certain calculations within absence management if the delivered configuration isn't able to achieve what you would like to achieve. So in particular, a partial period formula is referring to what your company policy is. Let's say, for example, I'm supposed to get 80 hours of vacation every single year, but I'm hired mid-year. So let's say I'm hired in June of this current year. Well, most companies, I'm not going to give a new hire 80 hours of vacation because they're coming in June. The partial period formula allows you to custom calculate what their accrual should be if they're joining partway through an accrual period. So if I set my accrual period to be 1/1 of every single year, and I come in June, and instead of getting 80 hours, I really should have 40, that's where you would use a partial period formula to do that calculation and ensure that your employee doesn't get more leave than they really should. Additionally, Oracle Absence Management allows you to set vesting rules. So that's something that I've seen quite a lot with across a few different clients, is that you can work for 3 months and accrue time, but you can't actually use the time you've accrued until 3 months has gone by, until you've been in your position for 3 months. So on the accrual side of things, you can set that vesting period if you do so choose. And then the final portion to talk about on accruals is the accrual method. As I'd said earlier, if I have 80 hours at the beginning of the year all at once, that is termed as a front-loaded plan in Oracle. So that just means that I get that endowment one time, and then I don't get it until the next period starts. So again, that goes back to, are you going to have a set date of like 1/1 every single year, or are you going to have incrementally every pay period, every month, every week, something like that? Those are your two options. Front-loaded and then incremental would be if I wanted to accrue on a certain frequency. Additionally, Oracle Absence Management allows you to set ceiling rules and carryover rules. So you can see over on the right for plan limits, you can specify ceiling rules and carryover rules. On the bottom, the carryover rule is set as a flat amount. So you can see the flat amount is set to 40 hours. Additionally, you can make that 40 hours expire after a certain amount of time. You can also prorate the carryover based on your employees' FTE. If you have some employees that aren't 40 hours a week, full-time employees, and you wanted to prorate based on company policy, you can do that as well. And then you can see up in the ceiling rule, so that's carryover is the flat amount. You can just set, just a one number, and that's the cap. Additionally, for both carryover and ceiling, for the ceiling, I've included in the example, you can include it within your accrual matrix. And so that brings us down to the bottom here. Under the accrual matrix, it gives you this little matrix that you can set up, and you can go through this expression builder, and you can see here in my example, this is just an example of different accrual bands that some companies might use. This is a derived factor, the person length of service. So that's just a piece of data within the system that you can set up to calculate what your length of service might be. And so for this particular example, what we're saying here is that if an individual has worked here for less than 5 years, we're going to enter this accrual band. And so the accrual rate for those individuals is going to be 80 hours. This is a front-loaded plan. So at the beginning of the year, people are going to be getting 80 hours at the start. Their ceiling is going to be 120. So that's what I was referring to with the ceiling rule, how it says include in matrix. If you have different policies for different accrual bands, you can set that up within the matrix. That same idea also applies to the carryover. For the purpose of this example, I just set up the flat amount, but you can also include that in the matrix as well. So you see here, we've done the less than 5 years of service, you get 80. If you're at 5 years or more, then you get 120, and your ceiling is 160. And so the system then calculates that and allocates time appropriately. So that was an accrual plan. I'm going to talk about the qualification plans now. So again, that's the maternity leave, short-term disability, long-term disability, things like that. For the plan term, the overall attributes of the accrual plan, of the qualification plan are going to be very similar, if not the exact same as the accrual plan. You can see you've got your units of measure, legislative data group, all that stuff, good stuff. So the real big difference and the big advantage for the qualification plans are the plan terms that you can set. So as far as plan terms go, I really want to highlight the rolling backwards plan term. Calendar year is the same thing as we were talking about earlier with the accrual plan. If I want it to roll over on 1/1 of every year, it'll just do all the calculations on that date. That's where your carryover happens, where your entitlement would be calculated and everything of that nature. For short-term disability or long-term disability, though, and especially FMLA, rolling backwards term is what FMLA is, and then what a lot of short-term disability plans use as well. So what rolling backwards term, what that means is that the rolling backwards term calculates an absence for a specified period of time that predates your current absence start date. And what I mean by that, as an example, if I have a short-term disability plan where for 1 year I have to look back in the past. Let's say I'm taking short-term disability on 1/1 of 2018, so this year. What the system does is it goes back to 1/1 of 2017 and it treats that as my plan term. It would then calculate any absences between 1/1 of 2018 and 1/1 of 2017, and then those would count against my entitlement that I have for short-term disability. So if I entered an absence in on June 1st of this year, it would then go back to June 1st of last year, and between those two dates, it would use any absences for short-term disability that have been taken in that time frame, and it would count those against my balance ultimately. Additionally, Oracle also provides a rolling forwards plan term, and that's kind of the same idea, except, looking out into the future. So that's more geared towards what you've already scheduled rather than what you've already taken. So then for qualification plans, the way that these plans work are similar. They have a similar matrix set up to the accrual plans that we saw earlier, but you have an extra section down at the bottom called qualification details. And so what we're doing again here in the matrix, as we did in the accrual matrix, is you're specifying a certain expression with a calculation or whatever your goal is. You can define by criteria which entitlements an employee is allowed based on their assignment record or their person record, whatever you may be checking against. So for this example, what I'm showing here is if your period of service is greater than or equal to 5 years, your payments work sequentially. So sequence-wise, we've got 5 down here. So 5 is your lowest. So if I have been working for this company for 5 or more years, I'm going to get 100% of the first 3 weeks of my leave. So for 120 hours, just the 40 times 3, I get paid at 100% of my rate. Once I've exhausted that 120 hours worth of absence, the system will sequentially move up to this next band, the 50% for the next 9 weeks. So it knows when you enter in those absences, once I go over 120 hours of this absence, that it will then start taking away from my 360 bucket, and that will be paid out at 50%. So that's just kind of a basic example of how a short-term disability could look in a system. If you had a different policy for people that have worked for 5 years or less, you can also configure that as well. Finally, the no entitlement plan, military leave, is very straightforward. Similar to the accrual plan in the general attributes, you would tie an eligibility profile to it and then tie it to payroll if you wanted to. Otherwise, this plan you just kind of set up, and then if you want to use it for tracking, you can. If you want to use it for actually paying out, you can do that as well. So just to reiterate, accrual plans, those are going to be your normal PTO plans, vacation, sick, floating holiday, whether it's accrued on a front-loaded basis, so you get all of your vacation at one point in the year, or if you get a certain amount of vacation every pay period, something like that. Qualification plans, short-term disability, long-term disability, you've had some sort of qualifying event that would entitle you to taking a leave of absence, possibly, and really allows you to do some flexible payment configurations. So that's a very large advantage of Oracle's qualification plans. Again, no entitlement, kind of jury duty, bereavement, military leave, something like that. So I think we have our second poll question coming up now.
So poll question 2, and again, we'll give you a minute to answer this, but what types of absence plans do you manage in your current system? Only accrual plans, accrual and qualification plans, or external vendor handles absence? Take a minute to answer that, and then we will show you the results. All right, it looks like we have a 50-50 split here. Good mix of the group. All right, Patrick, excuse me, Adam.
No problem.
That is my fault there.
Don't worry about it. Okay, so Oracle Absence Management, absence types, the other, not the other half, but really the other bulk of absence management. So like I said earlier, type equals take. This is what your employees are actually going to see when they enter an absence. Absence types have 3 options for their configuration, and those are called absence patterns. Absence patterns ultimately determine what display features you can see when you're entering an absence type from the employee side, from the manager side, and from the administration side. A generic absence type you can see here is mainly for a normal accrual plan. If I have vacation, sick, floating holiday, all I'm trying to capture is the date and how many hours, or possibly the start and stop time if that's what you're using to track your time and labor. The illness or injury pattern is geared towards sickness, like a long-term sickness, or possibly, if you're out on STD, some sort of injury, as it says there. And then childbirth or placement, maternity leave, and FMLA. What the advantages of using the different patterns are is what are you trying to capture in each absence. So if I'm using maternity leave as an example and childbirth is going to be the pattern, childbirth would give you the option to capture expected leave date. So I'm not exactly sure when I'm going to be going out, but I have a general idea that I will be out on X day. Additionally, if you're using absence management to capture certifications or the actual date of birth, you can do that as well. Expected return date can all be captured using that specific pattern. So it really comes down to which one suits you for your business's need of what you're trying to capture within absence management. I would refer you to the Oracle white paper to know the exact differences between all of them, but that's just kind of a high-level overview of what the different data entry options are for those absence patterns. Absence types have a few different limitations to them that you can set from the administration side. So if you have an absence where most of your employees are working 8 hours a day, you don't want them to ever enter in more than 8 hours a day. You have in the lower left side here, minimum duration alert, maximum duration alert. And what you can do with this option, this configuration, is set up a base amount that an employee can enter either minimum or maximum for their absence entry. And you can set it up to send them a warning if you want it to actually error out and not let them enter an absence for more than 8 hours. You can do that there as well. And then over on the right-hand side, the partial day rule here, if you have workers that have different work schedules, so some people might work 8 hours a day, you might have a group of people that work 4 10s or maybe 3 12s or something of that nature where they're varied in what they can actually enter for their time. You can utilize the work schedule for an employee and limit whether they can enter half a day, a full day, and what the requirement is for their actual absence entry based on their work schedule. So that works out really well if you have different groups that are taking a similar absence. So if you have one absence type of vacation for the whole company, but you have different groups that might be entering different hours for it, and you wanted to control the amount that they're entering in, you can do that there as well. So for absence record maintenance, you can also control on the absence type who's allowed to update the absence. If you see here, we've got checkboxes for employees, managers, and administrative updates. For instance, if you have a short-term disability type of absence and you don't want managers to be able to update or make any changes to that entry, you might want to deselect the Enable Manager Update section there. That way you're keeping it between the employee and the administration so that something like that, managers aren't able to go in and make changes to. Over on the right-hand side there, this is where we come into the time and labor integration. There's just a simple checkbox there on the absence side to enable the absence type to be used for time card entry. So on the Oracle time and labor side, if you go in and configure the time reporting code and match it up to the absence type, specifying that in your Oracle time and labor setup, then that would ultimately tie the Oracle time and labor time reporting code to the absence type. And then the absence type is then tied to the absence plan. The absence plan is tied to payroll. So it all kind of flows through together. So this is the area within Oracle Absence Management where you would tie the absence plans to the absence type. You can see here I've tied 2 different absence plans to this absence type. And so it works sequentially, similar to how we were talking about with the qualification plan. Is primarily, if I enter an absence for this particular absence type, it's going to take vacation it's going to take away from my vacation balance until it's depleted. Once it's depleted, the plan will then start deducting from the sick time plan. The absence type will start deducting from the sick time plan if my vacation plan is depleted of hours. So that's just a basic example, but you can see how you can use this if you had kind of a safety net for employees, so they can still take time off, and even if their bucket has been depleted entirely. So there's a few different uses for this. I won't get too far into that now. I want to get towards those case studies. As I was talking about earlier, the display features, this is the large portion of the absence type. This is where you can configure what an employee can see, what a manager can see, and what an administrator can see when they go to enter the absence. So if I've in this particular configuration, the only thing I've actually enabled are comments. And so you can enable comments, attachments, reasons. They have display features for different dates, approval statuses, things like that. Who can see balances, who can't see balances. And you can see here, it's really just enable or disable, allow to edit, or just display, just a little drop down for each one. And that's the main configuration behind the display features, is just with this kind of grid system that goes through and allows you to turn things on and off based on your user role. So that was absence types, pretty straightforward for the most part. And so now we're just going to talk about eligibility profiles real quick. This is just a very simple example of an eligibility profile. You can see here, I've included two different salary bases for salaried and hourly. Let's say, for instance, you had salary, hourly, and maybe you have a part-time hourly as well, but those folks don't get a certain absence, so I've left them off of this completely. And yeah, it's pretty straightforward. You've got a lot of different options for different items within employment, as well as personal information, whether you want gender, maybe smoker, non-smoker status, something like that. Derived factors, you can put in some manual calculations for, or not manual calculations, but specified calculations there if you were trying to pull something specific. But the main takeaway here is just that it's a pretty simple include, exclude type system. And based on if someone qualifies with the criteria that you've configured here, then they would be given that plan or that absence type and be allowed to use it, gain their entitlement and all that from the accrual plan or the the qualification plan. Poll question 3.
All right, so our third poll question. What do you view as your organization's largest obstacle when it comes to absence management? Please select one of the following. Manual calculations / adjustments creates additional work. Accuracy in reporting and tracking entries and leave balances. Complex rules and org policies current system cannot support. No employee self-service or real-time access to absence info. We'll give everyone a quick minute to answer that, and then we will show the results. All right. Poll is closed, and it looks like we have a little bit of a split between accuracy in reporting and tracking entries and leave balances versus no employee self-service or real-time access to absence info. Adam, back to you.
Thank you, sir. All right, so I'm going to kind of go through payroll integration and self-service a little quickly because I want to get to those case studies. Sorry, I'm talking a little bit longer than I might need to, but so as far as payroll integration goes, once an absence is approved, either on the absence side of things or on the time and labor side of things, it moves over into what's called a calculation card. And so Oracle Cloud, the payroll side of things, uses element entries, which is similar to an earnings code. And so when an absence is entered, approved, and flows through to payroll, it sits on the calculation card and is then picked up on the element entries when payroll is processed. And so once you actually enter something and it flows all the way through on the calculation card, what we've got here is just the elements that's been entered. You can see that there's the date for the payment. The rate is just 1 times the normal rate and 8 hours of of absence for this particular case. So pretty simple flow after being approved through absence and time and labor. That's where the entry will sit after, so you know that it's on the payroll side. So for employee self-service, folks get a couple different options. You can go through absence. You can also make it to your absence balances and entries through the time card as well. We're just going to show you the absence view of it, but just know that there are a few different ways to get there and see your absence data. This is just a sample absence entry for an employee. You can see up there on the upper left, I've put in the type and the frequency. You can select a single day, reoccurring days, continuous dates is what I've selected here. With continuous days, it uses the work schedule to calculate what your total absence duration is going to be. And then like we talked about earlier with the absence types, you can see here that comments are enabled, the add attachment has been enabled. And then up here, there's another display feature that you can enable in the absence type that allows you to do a projected balance. So this number here is the remaining balance that is calculated after I've entered this absence type. So some flexibility there, some fun kind of, some nice visibility into what your actual absence entitlements are going to be from the employee side. Additionally, the absence tile also gives you access to view your historical absences up here. You can see the different types that have been entered for this employee, as well as accrual balances based off of whenever the calculation was last done. It will show the balances for an employee there as well. Went a little too far. So that's the employee self-service side of things. Manager self-service wise, it's ultimately the same screen that you're going to. Up here on the upper left, this is from the My Team tile. That'll take you to a Manage Absence Record page for your employee. And then the page down here on the lower right-hand corner is ultimately the same page that the employee sees from their absence tile. It's just that the manager, whether you're allowing them or not, could or could not enter or change absences for that employee. And then real briefly, I'm going to talk about scheduled processes. Again, I want to get to those case studies. Every day, Oracle recommends best practice-wise to schedule the calculate accruals and balances process and the update accrual balance or accrual plan processes. And so what the calculate accruals does is just what it sounds like. It runs the calculation for your employees, makes sure that they are granted the leave that they're entitled to based on what you've configured within the accruals plan. Update plans and enrollments, that particular process runs and uses the eligibility profile to determine if an individual should be eligible for a plan. If they are, it will give them that plan on that specified date, or it will remove them from the plan if they're no longer eligible. The withdraw accruals and balances process is kind of the cofactor to the calculate accruals and balances. If you need to ever roll back a calculation for a certain period, you can do that there as well. Okay, so we're going to get into the case study now. So the first case study, or the case study that I'm going to be talking about, is an electric transmission company. On the smaller side, about 600 to 700 employees. And so first steps going in is always to evaluate policy documents. What exactly are we dealing with as far as their plans and their policies? Are there any caveats that we need to be aware of before building? And then, running configuration workshops or design workshops to really start to understand exactly how we're going to be molding the program to do what we need it to do. And so from there, we start a really basic prototype zero build is what we call it. And that's just to give the customer kind of an insight and a visual of what we're actually going to be seeing in the system, and then identify any areas of customization. And then as we go along with testing, we're always developing and refining the process to make sure that we're producing an adequate build for what we need to do within absence management. So some additional information about this particular client. The vendor handles short-term disability, long-term disability, and FMLA. They have an external vendor that does all of that for them. So within absence management, the only thing that was really in scope was sick time, vacation, and floating holiday. One tricky thing, though, is that it was a mid-year go-live. So a mid-year go-live definitely complicates things a little bit. Pulling current balances and converting those properly, along with historical absence data as well, is definitely a challenge. But here at Elire, we were able to utilize some custom programs that we built. They were using PeopleSoft previously, so we were able to use some custom programs that extracted the data in a very precise and accurate way. That way we mitigated as much of the risk as humanly possible for a mid-year go-live. It would have been a lot easier to do 1-1 at the beginning of the year, but we were able to, again, mitigate all the risk that a mid-year go-live comes along with. Not just in absence as well, with payroll and all the balances you have to pull for that. That was a very, very large advantage for us. And then for eligibility-wise, all employees are eligible for this absence. So the company was switching mid-year at the beginning of the next year from an old vacation policy to a new one. So the old vacation policy, they had, based on a benefit service date, an X amount of hours granted at the beginning of the year. Every 5 years of service, employees got an extra 40 hours of vacation. The ceiling was capped at 200, and at the end of the year, their balance is carried over and expired on April 1st or the end of March. So the new vacation policy is that new hires would all get 80 hours of vacation front-loaded to them, and every year employees get 8 more hours of vacation instead of having to wait the 5 years. So the ceiling is 200. The carryover this time, though, is 40 hours with no expiration. The big issue we ran into was that there's no way to tell. Some employees could negotiate for more absence than was the standard for their benefit service date. So we had no way of knowing if John Smith was supposed to get 80 hours or if John Smith was supposed to get 120 hours, because it all came in one lump sum. And after a bunch of historical PeopleSoft runs, there was no way to really tell what their original balance should be. So in order to get around that, we created a flex field on the managed person page. This is just a custom field that holds the value for us. And so what we did is we took their PeopleSoft grant from the previous year, and we used that as their base accrual. So they're always going to get that amount. And then every year after that, we wrote a custom fast formula that pulls that flex field value in. It does the calculation to figure out how many years it's been since our go live, and then it adds on that extra 8 hours a year for that person. So they get their annual accrual, and then the formula does an extra calculation and gives them their additional absence as well. And then the carryover and the ceiling are calculated within the formula. And then real quick, I'll talk about the vacation policy as well, the sick policy as well. So they were changing their policy from 120 hours being accrued annually and having a full carryover to having 80 hours accrued annually, and then the full carryover as well, but the ceiling went down to 120 hours. So the issue is that anyone that was over 120 hours prior to conversion, because their ceiling was previously 160 hours. So we've got people that are at 160, 145, everywhere between that and 120. Those people are essentially grandfathered in. And so if they're over 120 hours, their accrual is going to be 0. So they can't accrue anymore. But once they finally go under 120 hours, then they're going to kick into the new accrual plan where they can gain 80 hours of sick time. So you can't do that within the system with a normal configuration. So that leads us to another fast formula and custom calculation. So yeah, that was just kind of what I had already reiterated there. But this is our last slide here. So we did just a calculation here on the right-hand side. This variable right here is the sick time from the previous payroll. So it goes back and it looks, what was the balance for sick after the last payroll run? If it's greater than 120, we've just got this if-then conditional logic. If it's greater than 120, their carryover is going to be equal to their sick time, their ceiling is going to be equal to their sick time, and their accrual is going to be 0. If it's anything else, their carryover is going to be the full amount. So this is kind of an arbitrary number. I put 10,000 in there. No one's ever going to be able to get up to that point, but that just makes sure that they carry over their full amount. And then for the ceiling, hard-coded into the formula of 120, and then for the accrual, that's going to be 80. We return those in the formula, run the accrual process, and then we can see that that goes through and is calculated properly. Again, this is a very simple example. These can get way more complicated with the use of user-defined tables, loops. If you, a really common one is for mandatory paid leave. I have employees that get 1 hour for every 30 hours they work during a pay period. That's when you get more and more complex. And that's something that we at Elire are experienced with and have utilized as well across a few different customers. So that's really the highlight of the case study is these formulas and using those to get exactly what we need out of it.
Thanks so much, Adam. Any questions that were submitted over the course of the webinar will be followed up with individually due to the time constraints and coming up on the top of the hour. I just want to fill everyone in. Additional Elire webinars. We will be hosting one again next week. The title, Oracle Cloud Global HR from A to W, assignments to work structures and everything in between. Again, that'll be next Tuesday, August 14th. From 2 to 3 p.m. Central Standard Time, and the presenters will be Aaron Bolthus and Rachel Rudolph. You can register at elire.com/webinars, or you can follow up with either myself or with Adam, and we can make sure to help you. Connect with us on social media and at elire.com. And again, our contact information is here. Adam's is there, email, phone number, and again, mine, Alex Hintz. Email and phone number, and feel free to reach out if there are any questions, and we will make sure to get that information to you. And again, just to reiterate, the questions that were submitted today will be followed up with individually just due to the time constraints. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and look forward to being a resource to you in the future. Thank you.